Hello, my name is Jussi Jylkkä. I'm a psychologist and philosopher. I work here at the Åbo Akademi University. The topic of my talk is how could psychedelic experience reveal the ultimate nature of reality? And I focus on mystical experience because this is the kind of experience that supposedly could reveal the ultimate nature of reality. We know that psychedelics facilitate mystical type experiences which predict well-being outcomes in both clinical trials and in naturalistic studies. Lots of evidence for this, and the effect sizes are relatively large in the context of psychology. And mystical experiences have noetic quality, as mentioned here as well. Mystical insights are felt as true. And this is not to say that there wouldn't be other kinds of important insights and types of psychedelic experiences. As a matter of fact, there is evidence that psychological insights are more frequent or more commonly occurring in psychedelic experiences and also predict well-being outcomes more strongly. But here I focus on mystical experiences because of these insights. So, mystical insights are felt as true, but are they true? How could they be, or how would we know? Quite often the mystical insights or experiences have been assessed with the mystical experience questionnaire, which is problematic because, like all questionnaires, a researcher creates items in the questionnaire and the participant needs to agree or disagree with the items, so they don't have the option of like self-formulating what they really think. So basically the questionnaire like forces the participant to agree or disagree with some predefined statements. So we asked in one study people to report their psychedelic experiences and the insights that they had. Here are some. So these are like fully open reports, no instructions given, just like report your insights if you had any. We are all one. It is only our learned egoistic psyche that maintains the boundaries. A classical one. We all belong to nature and we were all the same meaningless piles of electrons that just happened to be organized in a certain way. So this is interesting because this is unitive insights and mystical insights in that sense, but it's also like kind of this naturalistic or atheistic sort of. It lacks this spiritual dimension, or doesn't refer to God or anything, cosmic consciousness. But then also there were lots of these classical type, spiritual, we are all beings made of love and light, we are all fragments of God. This is a classical one as well. Or ultimate reality is just pure present moment consciousness. This is what the participants write in their own words, so it appears that they also the mystical insight is not just a construct created by the scientists who make these questionnaires. People, as a matter of fact, report these kinds of insights. And they reported also lots of non-mystical insights, psychological insights, and more general philosophical wisdom-related insights, which were more frequent in the reports. So, could mystical insights like these be true? Yes, they could, if they are logically consistent and compatible with scientific knowledge, I have argued. And this was the topic mainly last week in the Borealis conference in Sweden, so now I try to make a sequel to that previous talk. So you might wonder why I'm referring here to logic and science. Well, we need to have some criteria of what is required for something to be true. And my premise is that we have lots of evidence for scientific theses from mature scientific theories. So I'm basically scientific realist, but not in the traditional sense. And logic, like if we focus on like conceptual claims made about the reality, they are like conceptual constructs. So we need to endorse classical logic, so they need to be logically consistent to be true. If they are not logically consistent, then they cannot be true. So now you might wonder, like, how could science be compatible with the idea that the reality is, for example, loving consciousness? To see this, it's important to distinguish between models of reality and the reality in itself. This is what I have been repeating many years now, because I think this is like a really important thing, not to mistake the map for the territory. And this was also like what we heard in the previous talk, like the mind operates with symbols, concepts, and all our knowledge of the reality is based on these like conceptual models or symbols, representations. And like the classical example, this is not the pipe, this is a picture of the pipe. You cannot smoke your herbs in this picture, you need a real pipe. And this is not a helium atom. Like even if we endorse scientific realism, which holds that science paints a valid, true picture of the reality, it's still just a picture. Even the best map is just a map, it's not the territory. So this is not to say that the scientific models would be false, it's just to emphasize that the models are just models. They are constructions in the minds or brains of this kind of ape. And of course the brain also is a construct in this kind of creature's mind, you could say. And also the so-called mind is also a conceptual construct. You know, recursion. And it's interesting that recursions also happen in psychedelic experience, but I won't go into that. So to emphasize this distinction between the model and the modeled even more, I want to make an argument which is supposed to demonstrate the limits of science. The first premise is that experiences are physical. This is mainly an empirical premise, and I consider there's like a vast amount of empirical evidence for this claim. Human experiences are probably brain processes. Other types of consciousness might be some other kinds of physical processes. The second premise is based on philosophical arguments. Science cannot reveal what experiences feel like, so to speak, or the subjective character, the first point perspective to consciousness. It feels like this to be speaking here to you, to be like doing this philosophical mind work here. And even if you would know everything about my brain and physiology, all the scientific facts about me, you wouldn't know what it's like to be me. You cannot know what it's like to be a bat, even if you know everything about the physiology of bats. Lots of arguments in philosophy to demonstrate this, and I accept this premise as true. So it follows that the physical is more than what science can reveal. This is really important because the premise is here. It's like this is physicalism. It builds on the premise that experiences are physical, as physicalism claims. And then we add the second premise, which says that science cannot reveal this subjective perspective. Then it follows that the physical must be more than what science can reveal. And the reason for this is because science is built on models. Science is just a modeling enterprise. So we have the helium atom, for example. It's our image of the helium atom and all equations, mathematical equations. They are abstractions in our minds. And they are constructed in the process of causal interaction of meticulous measurement with something out there, some external reality, which in itself is a black box. We don't have any direct access to those black boxes, we can only causally interact with them. It's the same as with you, like human interactions. I can only interact with you, but I can never directly know what it's like to be you. I can never be identical with you to be able to directly know you, like in this most intimate kind of way. Some would say like the way that God knows us through identity, not representing, which is always limited. And then we have all kinds of metaphysical models, conceptual constructs in our minds about some reality out there. We can say that it's physical, it's God, Brahman, energy, loving consciousness, whatever. These are all conceptual constructs. And still, the reality that they refer to is a black box. So this leaves room for all kinds of metaphysical conceptions about the nature of reality, including all kinds of mystical type ideas like idealism, for example. I think that physicalism and idealism are perfectly compatible. I don't really see like any point in the endless philosophical debates about these things, because no metaphysical theory can be verified or falsified. There's like, philosophers have been debating about the ultimate nature of reality or free will or whatever, like all the philosophical topics, and they never settle any disputes, or it's really rare that they would settle disputes. So there is no really progress in philosophy in the sense that they would somehow get closer to the truth. But to say that metaphysical theories cannot be verified or falsified, it doesn't entail that anything goes. So we have certain plausibility criteria to be able to rationally accept or like entertain the possibility of a metaphysical idea. And these are that the theory must be internally logically consistent, and it must be consistent with our scientific knowledge of the reality. And these are generally accepted by metaphysicians themselves. So if you can show to a dualist, for example, who says that the mind and body are distinct ontologically, if you can say that their theory, for example, violates the second law of thermodynamics or the causal closure of the physical, then usually the dualist, this interactionist dualist, tries to explain why it doesn't violate the laws of nature, because they accept that we need to they accept that scientific theories, mature scientific theories, are true in some sense. They approximate reality, approximate the truth. But there are several metaphysical theories which are consistent with these, satisfy these criteria. So pick one, pick your favorite. It's a matter of taste, basically, or if you have some important experience, you might start to intuit in line with idealism, for example, or cosmopsychism. But it's if you intuit, if some metaphysical idea feels true, it doesn't follow that it is true. From the feeling of knowing, it doesn't follow that you know. So we have no rational grounds to choose one metaphysics over another if these criteria are satisfied. So this is called metaphysical agnosticism. Or do we? The mystic claims that they do have some kind of direct access. They say that they have had this direct contact, unity with the ultimate nature of reality, and they have seen it with their own eyes. There are lots of examples of this, and this leads to the hard problem of mysticism. This is like the word is abducted from philosophy of mind, but I just invented it as a rhetorical means. So the hard problem of mysticism is, how could any mystical type truth ever be known? Or how could a mystical type experience ever justify a belief about the fundamental nature of reality? So if you consider like a person partakes in a psilocybin trial or a psychedelic trial, and they take the drug, and then they feel that they dissolve into the nature of reality, and they feel that they have encountered the fundamental nature of reality. But from the external perspective, it seems that their brain is in a special kind of state, like non-ordinary state, and they are in the tube, and their brain is not dissolved, their body is not dissolved. It's just an experience of dissolve, which doesn't entail like literal dissolving with the, or unity with the ultimate nature of reality, whatever that means. But anyway, when we ask the question, how could this kind of experience reveal the fundamental nature of reality, we must first distinguish between two senses of fundamental nature of reality. So, in the epistemic sense, the fundamental nature of some object X, like this pointer here, it is simply the pointer in itself. in contrast to my model's perceptions of the pointer. When I put it there and I don't think about it and I don't perceive it, you can perceive it. It still exists. It's highly likely that it still exists, and it has some nature. It is something which I cannot know except for through like perceiving or representing it. So this pointer is a mystery. Its fundamental nature in this epistemic sense, it's a mystery. We don't know what this pointer fundamentally is. You can say that it's made of atoms, of course, but the atoms are also models in our mind, and we don't know what the pointer is like beyond those models. So it's a mystery. The whole reality is a mystery all the time. So in this sense, this is the epistemic sense of the fundamental nature of reality. And then we have a metaphysical, which is maybe the more what people more often mean by the term fundamental nature of reality. And it is this ontological metaphysical. It's that something from which everything emerges from. For example, God as the ground of being, or Brahman or something. That's something that we are all forms of. A physicalist might say that it's quantum fields, which I believe are 4 quantum fields at this moment. Like there is no single one physical thing, so there is no the fundamental nature in physics, but this is more philosophy. So I would argue that we can know the fundamental nature of reality in this epistemic sense, and we know it all the time, because I am this consciousness here, and I know the nature of this consciousness, this process here, no matter how I call it, directly, because I am it. This is it. And this kind of knowledge can indeed be amplified in unitary experiences facilitated by meditation or psychedelics or however. But I think it's present all the time because I am aware. But in contrast, its metaphysical fundamental nature it's more difficult to argue how we could have knowledge of that in a mystical experience. Here's an image from our old paper with my neuroscientist friend, where we were mainly dealing with the so-called hard problem of consciousness. We tried to show that there really is no hard problem of consciousness, because the whole epistemic gap is based on conflation between the model and the modeled, but it can be applied to this mysticism topic as well. So here we have on the bottom level, we have the modeled, like things in themselves beyond our models of them. On the top level, we have our models of the reality, scientific models in this case. So we have models of subatomic particles which refer to something out there, which in themselves, in this epistemic fundamental nature sense, they are black boxes. And atoms, organic molecules, neurons, and finally the neural correlate of this experience here. Well, and there is a smooth continuum. In principle, it can be argued that the neural correlate of consciousness can be reduced to the activity of neurons, which can be reduced to the activity of organic molecules and so on. And in essence, this basically shows how consciousness can be reduced all the way down to atoms and subatomic particles, because this neural correlate of consciousness model is a model of the experience. So this experience is the concrete entity, thing in itself in the reality, which neuroscientists model as a neural correlate. So you could say that on the bottom level you have this like epistemically fundamental nature, so the model independent nature of all entities or processes in the reality. And then on the left side we have this metaphysically fundamental nature. That's something which everything is forms of. So this one little part of the reality I can directly know because I am it. And it is what science models as a neural correlate. So yeah, so the whole epistemic gap between experience and its neural correlate is just this distinction between the model and the modeled. Of course, there is epistemic gap between them. So, yeah, I already said this. It's argued in more detail in this paper, Mary on Acid. And this kind of like unitary knowledge of my own process of consciousness can be amplified in unitary states of consciousness because there are no dualities. There is no subject and object. There is no muddle and muddled. There is just something happening and you know it because it's right here. And it does give you knowledge of the fundamental nature of reality in this epistemic sense. But it's only one piece of the reality, one part of the reality. So the hard problem again is, could there ever be direct access to the black boxes? Ram Das here says yes. So there are some solution attempts to rationalize this. Of course, if you have faith in this, if you believe it, it's okay, you may, but you cannot say that you know it unless you can show how you know it. So here is one argument. I will just really briefly go through this. Empty consciousness in a mystical state lacks form. If something lacks form, then it cannot be distinguished from anything else. So therefore, empty consciousness is identical with the rest of reality. This is from Walter's days. But it's problematic because even if an experience seems to lack form, it doesn't follow that it does lack form. It's more plausible, maybe, that it's a brain process of a specific kind, like Thomas Metzinger argues, for example. And then we have like this reducing valve idea where the brain is basically like a reducing valve or a prism that refracts or reduces the white light that is the fundamental nature of reality into these more specific forms like human consciousness. I cannot go into this. This is also from Henry Bergson. Peter Sjöstedt-Hughes has some arguments like this. Quite speculative, but interesting. And then we could say that we can somehow see the substance through the forms. If everything is forms of a single substance, you can say that it's ideal, cosmic consciousness, or physical, or maybe they are just one and the same thing. Then somehow through being a form of that single substance, I can through this form see the substance that has this form. So this is more like this metaphorical kind of idea. But I won't go into those in more detail. I think they are highly speculative. And like all metaphysical ideas, they cannot be verified or falsified. So which is more likely? That the mystic's consciousness has become identical with the fundamental nature of reality in this metaphysical sense during their mystical experience. That they have like literally become one with, for example, some quantum fields or God as the ground of being during the mystical state, or that the mystic's brain is in a non-ordinary state, in which case, in this latter case, the state doesn't afford knowledge of the whole of reality, it only affords knowledge of this part of reality. So I think there is some like, I personally feel that there is some kind of like arrogance or like hybris about the idea that we could somehow get to directly know the fundamental nature of all of reality. Like, how could we? We are limited creatures. In Christian mysticism, this is, I think, nicely put by Meister Eckhart, for example. It's a bit like heresy to think that we could become identical with God. Like omnipotent, the universe, like the biggest. How could this little creature be in any sense like identical with God? Or even if it were, how could it like somehow like bring back the knowledge from that experience back to this limited perspective? There are like problems in this. There are like lots of problems, I think. Okay, I won't go into that, I'm running out of time. So the conclusion is that psychedelics, meditation, and other like non-dual states of consciousness can indeed reveal the fundamental nature of reality, or this part of reality here, but it's only part of reality, not the whole of reality, and it would be a bit arrogant to think that I can see the like God. Well, God is a mystery if you believe in that, or the fundamental nature of reality is a mystery. So like in Finnish we could say tätäse, which is a partitive. It's like it is this kind of thing or process, but we cannot say tämä se on in a nominative, like it is this thing or this process. So we can say tätä se on. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jussi. That was a mystically long final minute. Any questions?
I ask you to speak loud because I have bad hearing.
Thank you so much, Jussi. This was very thought-provoking and engaging. You're a great presenter. More of a kind of remark than a question per se, as a recovering addict of knowledge, as most of us are here. This thought of knowledge, I think it's quite slippery to know something, as you say as well. So how I personally view it is that I'm no longer trying to know things or to be known or know myself. What I'm actually trying to do is to witness. And I think there's a really important distinction between these two. And I think witnessing is possible. You can witness something and you can be witnessed. And that is true enough. At least this is how I see it. Yeah. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and you can also question in what sense I know this experience here. So does it like constitute knowledge at all? And eliminativist has like good arguments to say that I don't really know what my consciousness feels like, that it's kind of like a conceptual artifact in its own right as well. So I think that witnessing is also an interesting perspective on that.
Thank you. This is a fascinating conclusion, and this is also a bit of a remark, but I'd like you to elaborate on this. I recall from a few years ago studying consciousness, there was this argument about how we used to not know what life was, that life had this hard problem, but then we've stopped asking that question because our models have become so useful that it's not a pertinent question anymore. They argued that this would be the same with consciousness. I wonder, it sounded that you were kind of also referring to the hard problem of consciousness with the model and modeled. And I was wondering whether you could bring in the same argument for the hard problem of mysticism, where, the argument of psychedelics not showing the whole thing, but a part of it, if we continue studying the mystical experience of psychedelics or other ways of having mystical experiences, can we stop asking the hard problem question?
Thank you. I don't think there is like clear analogy between the biological case and the hard problem of mysticism, because this is like a principled. Of course, if we could show that, for example, during a mystical state, the neural correlate of my consciousness during the mystical state would be somehow reduced to a like quantum superposition or something like that, which is sometimes subjective feeling that this feels like the superposition. If we could show that, and it's an empirical question to a large extent, then we would basically solve the hard problem, and we would show that, okay, this mystic now had direct access to the fundamental nature of reality in the sense of being in a superposition or something like that. And there are actually some people who think that because psychedelics increase entropy in the brain, so if you like increase entropy sufficiently or collapse the models sufficiently, then you go like down to levels of the like abstraction hierarchy in the nervous system or the cognitive system, ending up on the like really like fundamental level. So there are arguments like this. I don't consider them as plausible, at least at this moment. But in contrast, so in this sense, it is actually like similar to biology because it can be reduced to an empirical question. But by contrast, the hard problem of consciousness, that's a category mistake basically. It's like just like trying to reduce consciousness to a model of the physical without understanding that it's just a model. You cannot reduce consciousness to an abstraction.
Thanks for the interesting and engaging presentation. What do you think of this line of thinking? Or some mystical traditions, they might claim that the mystical experiences give direct access to ultimate reality, but then there is also in many traditions this related but bit different line of thinking that our ordinary way of seeing reality is somehow either illusion or has kind of that it's imperfect way of seeing reality, and for example, not only or you could approach this as our experience is constructed and we see it through our predictive models or what you have, and then think about also all the egocentric biases that guide our attention in everyday life, and then through different like non-ordinary states we might be in states that are kind of less constructed and less illusionary, even though they would not be the ultimate reality. And thus they could have some like epistemic benefit and maybe give like in somehow more accurate picture of the reality.
Yes, absolutely. I agree, sympathize with that line of reasoning. And I think that's exactly how meditation or psychedelics could work, through like showing us the constructedness of our everyday reality. That it's like the table that I perceive is different from that something which is producing these perceptions. And some people argue that psychedelics could increase cognitive diffusion, like seeing our models as models or thoughts as thoughts and concepts as concepts. But the evidence for this idea mainly comes from psychological flexibility literature, where it refers mainly to these like more everyday thoughts and emotions that we can like distance ourselves from. But when it comes to like these metaphysical notions or ideas, then it appears that there is no evidence for this. We asked about this in one survey, and there were no correlations between psychedelics use and the idea that models are just models. So, and maybe one reason for this is because of the noetic quality. A person has a metaphysical, mystical insight, and which feels so real that they easily forget that it was still just an experience, because it doesn't, to them, it doesn't feel like just an experience. But this other point that you had, I sometimes think that maybe this whole idea about the mystical experience revealing the like fundamental nature of all of reality in this metaphysical sense, maybe it's a straw man, because who thinks like this? Well, Ram Dass, for example, says the reality is forms of loving consciousness. Like lots of anecdotal, but in like more like Oskari might know in like Vedanta, for example. Well, Brahman is of course like the ultimate nature of like all of reality, and we could somehow get access to it. But is it really? Do any of the like serious mystics really claim that we would have this kind of knowledge of this fundamental nature of all of reality? I don't know.
Okay, great. One more question.
One more question. Hello, Mr. Scientific Realist, engineer here. Engineering is great because it never asks what the car is. It asks like, can we make it faster? And what if it would have lasers? So the learning from there is that, yeah, you can't know everything, but you can know something, and you can have like nice tools. And then what like Silicon Valley is doing a really great job is that the hubris is a very human thing, and they totally do regress like back into magical thinking with the generative AI and ISCAD and so on. But how, when we would do these, because yeah, you're saying we can't know everything, but what is it that we could know? What tools would we need? And the hardest one, how do we do it without regressing back to magical thinking?
Without doing what?
Regressing back into like magical thinking.
Aha. Well, that's a mouthful. I don't know what to respond to that. Like, yeah, I think that of course, like when you take psychedelics, for example, they expand your consciousness literally in the sense of like enabling forms of consciousness that were not possible previously in the sober state. And meditation does the same, and somehow it also like makes even the everyday reality seem like more miraculous in a sense, like a bit like seeing like with fresh eyes, the beginner's mind and so on. So I don't know about these like technologies and so on. I don't know. If you would have some like one simple question, I might try to answer that, but I cannot answer those three questions now. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jussi.
Thank you.